Songs of a True Right Brother, talking about the structure of the world, and I ended up last time talking about the material that exists when we perceive the world, when our own thinking colors the world. There's sort of two parts of this. One is more of a feeling part. It's our likes and dislikes. We are drawn toward a person, or we feel repulsed by a person. Sometimes these feelings are strong, and sometimes they are weak. But everyone is structured in this way. Every human being has this psychological structure of antipathies and sympathies. It's the way Rudolf Steiner talked about it, or likes and dislikes. We also have conceptions, and these conceptions have been delivered to us largely by our environment and through the teaching of our parents, through our religious education, through our normal forces of education. We have all kinds of ideas about the world, and these are ideas that we have perhaps not thought about. Of course, previously I suggested that one should throw out any kind of system from anybody else, including the system I'm giving you now. Don't take it as a given. Think about it yourself. Decide for yourself whether the things I'm saying is true or not, because that's how we have a science of the spirit, which we need today. We need to have a science of the spirit if we're going to reintroduce spirit, if we're going to understand the qualitative nature of existence, not just the quantitative nature. We need to introduce this stuff in a way in which everybody can make their own objective empirical observations of existence and come to their own understanding. So anyway, so we have likes and dislikes, and we have conceptions, and we color the world through this, and as we walk through the world, we'll meet people. And we'll meet these people, and we will have ideas about them, ways we think and feel about them. And a lot of these, depending on your age and stuff, will be habitual. And some of these things will be different across generations. Younger people have quite different approach to things. This has a little bit to do with what I called earlier the evolution of consciousness, which is a more subtly perceived phenomenon, but it's nevertheless there. Young people approach these things in a quite different way than someone my age does. And when this was noticed a little bit in the 60s, people talked about the generation gap. But the generation gap is sort of there constantly. Young people experience a different world than they experience. When we are parents of young people, we edit what our parents did. We don't just automatically pass on our parents, although in the past things tended to be more that way, when people just parented the same way their parents parented them. But one of the things that happened in the 60s, for example, was that there was a change in the parenting, and some people think this is bad and some people think this is good. And you can read Robert Bly, for example, a really interesting book called The Sibling Society. Bly is one of our wise men with his book Iron John. Everybody who wants to get into those things should read Iron John and The Sibling Society. He didn't quite understand the structure of the world, but he observed the fact that there was this change in parenting, and a lot of other people have observed this. So when we think about these simple things, when we think about the fact that we have likes and dislikes, and we have conceptions by which we view the world, that this lens of feelings, the likes and dislikes, and this lens of conceptions, the product of thinking, that we view the world are highly individualized in a certain kind of way. We'll be in communities where we share this. When we're part of the world of our parents, we sort of share that world. When we become involved with our peer group, we sort of share that world. When we enter into school or even higher education, we share that world. When we enter into work life, we share that world. Someone who goes to work for a large corporation today may have the feeling that it requires of them a great deal of compromise. When I was growing up, these kinds of natural compromises that people made was called being mature. You had to grow up, you had to be mature, you had to understand that you had to compromise. You couldn't be childish and do whatever you wanted. You had to do what the social world expected of you. And of course these rules are understood subconsciously in a lot of cases, and they vary over the world. The extent to which someone is raised in China and goes through those kinds of issues will be different from the way if they're raised in the United States of America. And if we want to appreciate the structure of the world and its fine points, we need to actually think about very carefully how the world is differentiated in this very, very huge way that enables so many individuals, as was pointed out in the material that I read from Heroes some talks ago, that each individual is unique, and it's a rather amazing thing that they're unique. But when you get into the details of their biography, you can see this uniqueness. It's stamped on it. A friend of mine, well, she's more of an acquaintance, and we're kind of having a little tit or tat with each other. I'm kind of disappointed in her in a kind of way, and she seems to be disappointed in me. But anyway, she wrote this really wonderful book called Unbecoming an Alchemist. Her name is Catherine McCune. And if you want to read something that has a good expression of the spiritual ideas about yourself and the world from the point of view of a modern alchemist, read Catherine McCune's book. If you want to get into something that's not related to the anthroposophy, to Rudolf Steiner, that I tend to represent, although I don't represent him exclusively, then you read Meditations on the Tarot, A Journey into Christian Hermeticism. Now, why do you read that book? Well, you read that book because it says some very interesting, different things about the Christian mysteries. Now, both Catherine McCune's book and the book Meditations on the Tarot are, from my point of view, manifestations of the return of the Divine Feminine. You'll find the return of the Divine Feminine everywhere in modern society. It sneaks up, of course, in obvious places with the development of feminism, as people sort of took a revolutionary point of view towards their existence during the 1960s, and all the struggles of women over the last couple of centuries as they tried to emerge from the dominance of a paternalistic society and Western civilization. And of course these issues are even profounder in different places in the world. They're also very different. For example, if we just read what comes to us from certain kinds of people in the press about the Muslim world and the Muslim world's relationship to women, we can get a very one-sided picture, because you don't really understand what goes on intimately in those biographies unless you become more deeply acquainted with them, and you're certainly not going to get much of a help from the people that have strong antipathies. Remember those antipathies, strong antipathies to what they conceive of as the suppression of women in Islamic societies. We just need to remember that women were suppressed in our society, and because we feel we've gone in advance of that, and we shouldn't really look down on Muslim societies for that situation, because those differences in those biographies are important to the individuals living those biographies. It isn't our business to tell the world how to be. One of the teachers I study, Franz Barden, said, "Sweep before your own doorstep first," which of course is a variation on "Judge not, lest you be judged." If you want to be a creative thinker, if you want to bring in the moral thinking that's possible in you, if you want to experience the second Eucharist, which is a gesture in moral thinking, then these likes and dislikes and the different concepts you have are important aspects of your own self-observation. More later.